It's April Fool's Day, so naturally we're talking about how to trick your audience. Wait, you didn't just click on this video because of the cute anime girl in the thumbnail, did you? Ugh, talk about some misdirection. I guess that is pretty fitting though, as today we're looking at a type of misdirection known as a red herring, a tool for writers to mislead their audience by giving false clues, which can allow for some huge twists or impactful moments. We have quite a few series to look at today, so heads up, there will be spoilers for Bleach, One Piece, AxelBeats, Kill La Kill, and Gurren Lagann. Of course, before we get into this video, we do have some YouTube stuff to talk about. If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, remember that leaving a like goes a long way in helping me to grow and in letting me know which kind of videos you'd like to see in the future. I'm aiming for 100,000 subscribers this year, so please do me the favor of helping me reach that goal by subscribing. And if you'd like to go the extra mile by helping me a little bit more, please consider checking out my Patreon or becoming a member here on YouTube. Enough of that stuff though, let's get back into the video. Before we talk about specific examples though, we should probably talk about where the term red herring comes from, as well as what it is and what it is not. So, way back when, hunting foxes was a much more common thing. And as is the case with plenty of small game hunting, dogs would be used to help hunters track down their prey. In doing so, it was incredibly important that a dog would be trained to stay focused on the scent of the fox and not be distracted by other smells. And that's where the red herring comes in. A red herring, not in a literary sense, is a fish with a pretty potent odor, and hunters would walk ahead of the path with one of these fish in hand, creating a false scent trail that a dog would be able to follow. If the dog was able to keep on the trail of the fox and not be distracted by the fish, then they would get a treat, and over time they would train them to become more and more reliable. And when it comes to writing, red herrings are actually pretty similar. You have some kind of trail or reveal that things are building towards, and a distraction is set up to pull the audience away and make them second guess things. By introducing these false elements or misleading clues, a writer can build suspense, keep their audience engaged, add layers of complexity, and in many cases provide an ending or twist that becomes much more powerful than it could have been on its own. And as you might expect with these kind of benefits, they are typically, though not always, used in mystery stories or situations, as well as stories that want to land a much more heavy emotional impact in the end. While red herrings can be super effective, they can also be completely butchered and ruin what they are trying to prop up. This especially happens when the decoy becomes the only thing that we are hinted towards. When we think back to the hunting dogs, while the smell of the fish might be stronger than the scent of the fox is still there. In most cases, you want the audience to still be able to put clues together and come to the right place, or at least to recognize that the decoy is the wrong place. An impactful moment or twist should have a satisfying build-up, and when that build-up seems to be meant for something else, things can kinda just feel wrong. So let's take a look at one of the most common types of red herring in anime, what I'm calling the false villain. These are characters who are presented from the start to be antagonistic towards the protagonist. They don't particularly need to be evil, however, they often ride that moral gray line and act more coldly in general. These less pleasant features in combination with the position of status or power can really allow the audience to think that these characters have everything they might need to be the villain of the story, when in many cases they are either lackeys or closer to something along the lines of an anti-hero or anti-villain. As I said, this is super common in anime, but some of my favorite examples can be seen in Kill La Kill and Bleach with Satsuki and Gin. In Satsuki's case, she is immediately introduced as the main antagonist and the dictator-like ruler of Honnoji Academy, a school where students are given superpowered clothing made with life fiber in association with their rank and usefulness to Satsuki. When the protagonist Ryuko enters the school, she comes face to face with several obstacles, all put in place by Satsuki as she tries to crush the descent that Ryuko is emblematic of. This presents Satsuki as the center point of all the conflict in the series. She's strong, she's intimidating, she's powerful, she is dominating. 9 out of 10 times, this is your big bad. But there's a few things out of place here. The biggest question we have is just what are these life fiber clothes? Where do they come from? Why do they grant superpowers? And on top of that, why is Ryuko's able to talk? Then, while admittedly this is an anime, so a teen-centric society is not the most crazy thing, there are a few adults here and there, so why don't any of them seem to have a place above Satsuki in the structure of the academy? I think it's fair to assume that adults would be the ones running schools, not the children who attend them. So that's kinda weird as well. And the nail in the coffin is obviously in episode 6, when Satsuki gets a call from a mysterious rainbow-haired woman that her butler frighteningly refers to as Mistress Ragyo. And immediately, we get some truly devastating boss music playing. Aside from this scene though, Ragyo, the true villain of the series, isn't really present until the midway point of the series. But this, in my opinion, is a fairly clean, simple, and well-executed example of a red herring in anime. We have a much stronger and in-your-face presence being wagged around in front of us, with several smaller questions that remain unsolvable or incongruous with the character we are looking at. These aren't typically issues that are brought to the forefront or focused on, but they are present if you're being thoughtful about the series you're watching. Then, once things are more established, we have an admittedly, in this case, very heavy-handed hint towards something much greater. The use of Satsuki as a red herring here adds a layer of complexity and intrigue to the story as a whole, but it also acts as a tool to flush out her character. We are first introduced to her as this one-dimensional tyrant, and this very simple depiction of her allows her to easily be locked into that villain slot. But as we learn more about the world and her position in it, suddenly we are able to see different sides of her, and she immediately becomes a more interesting character because of it. And Satsuki isn't the only character to benefit from this. Ragyo realistically jumps into the position that Satsuki was holding. It's a simple trick, but it is extremely effective here in making Ragyo feel like a greater villain than she really is. Similarly, we have Gin from Bleach. Behind all of the over-the-top, crazy battles that we have in the Soul Society arc, we have a bit of a glorified whodunit mystery when one of the captains, Aizen, has been found murdered and pinned against a wall. This is kind of an interesting red herring, as there are 4 very different types of misdirection being used. Firstly, this plot point is not the main focus of the arc. Don't get me wrong, it is super important and some attention is drawn to it, but what the audience is focused on is Ichigo and the gang trying to save Rukia from her brother and the other captains. Something that we get so focused on and excited about that it's kind of hard to really focus on background events like this. Second, Aizen being killed is very much an enemy team kind of thing. These are the guys that we're fighting against to save Rukia, so while this is impactful, it isn't directly relevant to our squad. There's this level of disconnection between this event and the audience purely based on who it's happening to. Third, we have Gin himself. When Ichigo and the gang arrive in the Soul Society, Gin is supposed to kill them, but instead he just pushes them off and leaves them alive. This is something that raises the suspicion of the other captains, as it's kind of odd behavior in general. And when your own side is looking to accuse you, the audience probably will do the same on some level. And it doesn't help that Gin looks like a villain. He's got this very snake-like appearance, he's sneaky, and he has this ever-present, very creepy smile. It's in your face that he isn't supposed to be a good guy. And that is, of course, in contrast to our 4th misdirection, Aizen. Aizen is the plainest and least suspicious looking of the captains. He is almost hard to notice within the group. Aizen is suspicious of Rukia's execution being expedited, which seemingly allies him with Renji as people who more or less are trustworthy within the Soul Society. He takes the Gin conspiracy much more seriously than everyone else. Everything about him is subtle and inoffensive. But then there's his death, which not only is the centerpiece for a lot of the chaos, but also writes him out of any suspicion. There are, of course, hints here and there about Aizen not really being dead, but this actually leads us into a very specific subsection of red herrings, being the unreliable narrator. I've talked about this before, but basically this involves the audience's point of view being unreliable or faulty, in most cases without us knowing. And the reason for this here is that when Aizen reveals himself and explains his ability, we learn that he can perfectly hypnotize anyone who sees his sword. So all of the captains whose perspectives we've been sharing have all been tainted. However, these characters are still acting very true to who they are. If they truly believed Aizen was killed, this is how they'd react. And this, in combination with the several layers of misdirection, the general sense of chaos of the Soul Society arc, and the magical world that we find ourselves in, which has set the precedent for such abilities to exist, allows for the final reveal to be much more powerful and shocking, rather than just feeling like a cheap ass pull. There are crumbs all over the place, but the audience is too focused on saving Rukia, or on Ichigo's next big fight and power-up to pay attention to something that we feel has already been resolved, with Gin being the obvious villain. I mean, look at how this dude showed up to Aizen's murder scene. How could we not think it was him? It's less clean than the big bad reveal for Kill la Kill, purely based on having more layers and a less direct hint, but it's still a masterclass of a twist that really takes advantage of every element that the arc is working with to keep the audience guessing. Another anime which uses that kind of who will the villain be trick is Gurren Lagann, which jumps from Lord Genome to the anti-spiral. However, this isn't the first time that they use this fake out. This is one of the very few series that I can think of that misleads the audience into believing that someone else will be the protagonist. Throughout the first few episodes, we're following our core group of people trying to make it to the surface, being led by the trio of Yoko, Simone, and Kamina, with Kamina being presented as the clear leader. He is strong, charismatic, he's the one who takes actions, he's funny, he is everything that we have been taught that our main character should be. Meanwhile, Simone is the typical little brother character. This character archetype is often a support role for the majority of the series, and maybe later they'll tend to stand up on their own 2 feet down the line. They aren't people you'd imagine to be put into leadership roles, really, ever. And in Simone's case, specifically, there's a very heavy dependence on the big brother character of Kamina. All of the sparks of greatness within Simone stem from his connection with Kamina. He needs him to be successful. But very early on in the series, something unexpected happens when Kamina dies. This character that we've been led to believe will be the answer to all of our group's problems is suddenly taken out of the picture, and it's up to Simone to step up and take his place. A protagonist or lead character dying is always going to be pretty shocking, but by playing with an audience's expectations through popular established archetypes, it becomes immensely more surprising. And as the audience shifts perspectives from Kamina to Simone, we suddenly get this sense of emptiness and of not being ready. As I said, really everything Simone has to offer seems to come from Kamina, and by removing that factor, we go from having a protagonist with everything that our group needed, to one who needs to find all of those traits and grow into them. This is no longer just a story about a hero leading people to a new age, it becomes a story about a hero leaving a legacy that inspires someone else to become the leader that his people needs. Another really interesting example of a red herring is in my favorite anime, AxelBeats, in which a bunch of kids get a second chance at life in purgatory until they pass on or until Angel eliminates them, with Angel being set up as the ultimate antagonist for the series from the very first scene in the show. What the misdirection here is that the actual antagonist of the series, well, there kinda isn't one, at least not really. It turns out that this afterlife has been established specifically for kids who had awful lives and died young, so that they can have a chance to reach peace and fulfillment before moving on or being reincarnated and starting a new life. And Angel isn't some heartless villain randomly obliterating people, she's trying to help them reach that peace and fulfillment. But Angel's role isn't the only misdirection being used here. We also have the plot itself. The story goes from being this kind of action comedy series where teenagers rebel against Angel and God, to one that instead is focused on emotions, overcoming tragedy, and finding happiness despite your past. All of this plays on the assumptions made by the viewer at the very start of the story, and that little bit of misdirection allows the audience to lower their guards for a light-hearted action comedy, and then uses that opening for a much more sentimental and bittersweet experience, producing a way more powerful effect than would have been possible otherwise. And the last misdirection that I want to talk about comes from One Piece. And while Oda does a ton of red herrings and misdirections throughout the series, it's real long after all, there's going to be plenty of examples. The one I'm going to focus on here is actually very early on, and it's the idea of getting a new crew member in Alabasta. Since entering the Grand Line, the Straw Hats had been joined by Princess Vivi. She first arrives as Miss Wednesday working for Baroque Works, but by the end of Whiskey Peak, it's revealed that she is actually a princess in disguise, and she becomes a companion for the crew as they head towards her homeland to stop the warlord Crocodile from starting a revolution and overthrowing her father. This puts Vivi in a pretty unique position. We've of course had people working with the crew before, but no one aside from Nami has really visited more than one location with us. And of course, Nami joins the crew ultimately. And yes, we did have Johnny and Yosaku go to both the Baratier and Arlong Park, but they're by no means major or prominent players in either arcs, and they don't really offer the crew much at all. Conversely, Vivi is front and center for most of her time with the crew. She offers something in how she teaches Luffy what it means to be a leader. She makes friends with everyone, she fights with us, she laughs with us, and it genuinely feels like she is a Straw Hat. And honestly, why wouldn't she? We're introduced to Vivi in chapter 103 of the manga, and she is with us until the end of Alabasta in chapter 216. At this point, we have officially had more of One Piece with her than without her. Hell, she's with us so long that she even gets a cut-in card. Which is why when we do reach the end of the Alabasta saga, and Vivi is given the choice to become a pirate and travel with the Straw Hats or remain in her homeland, it is a huge disappointment to a lot of people that she chooses to stay. That isn't to say that it's surprising, as literally everything she has said and done for 90% of the trip has been in reference to Alabasta, as well as what it means to be there for her people. But that doesn't change the fact that there was always this 1% chance in people's minds that just maybe Vivi would come with us after Alabasta found peace. And as we see Igaram dressed up as her to speak to her people so she can sneak away to the coast to meet with her friends, part of us believes that she will join the crew. But of course, she doesn't. It's an entire saga of building her relationships and setting her place in the crew, all coming to a peak with a moment of false hope. And listen, I love Vivi. She's one of my favorite characters in the series, and I would have loved for her to join the crew, but I have never heard someone say that it didn't make sense that she didn't join, or that they were angry with the decision. Because while it's always a possibility, and while that possibility was directly in front of us for a moment, it doesn't make sense for her character. But just for a second, we all overlook that, we all believe, and the emotional bait and switch is all the stronger for it. But even so, it doesn't end there. While we have been spending time with Vivi personally since Whiskey Peak, there's also someone else who's introduced to us almost at the same time. That being Miss All Sunday, Nico Robin. And Robin is kinda weird. She's an enemy who offers to help and even suggests a path that's more directly towards Alabasta. And once we eventually do reach Alabasta, her position is even stranger. She laughs when Crocodile is fooled or makes a mistake. She saves Luffy's life when Crocodile buries him. She is helpful. Robin is a character who is on a mission but doesn't seem to share that sense of brutality that Crocodile has. She only really attacks people who try to stop her or get in her way, but otherwise she doesn't really seem to be particularly aligned with Crocodile more so than anyone else when push comes to shove. And when we leave Alabasta, it isn't the person that we've been with this whole time, or who has this whole big moment dedicated to the idea of them joining the crew who sails away with us. It is Nico Robin, the enemy who had lent us a hand on several occasions that ends up leaving with us. But we're so focused on Vivi that we never even consider Robin joining, and it makes for a really fun surprise when she does. Red herrings and misdirection in general are some of the most interesting tools that writers have at their disposal when creating a story, and they can go a long way in giving the audience a much more powerful reaction to a scene or in keeping them interested in the story. These are a few of my favorites, but what are your favorite misdirections in anime? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future. But that's going to be it for now, so I hope to see you in the next one. Until then though, remember to stay excellent.